Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend, and today we'll be looking at primitive baking techniques, baking bread for the poor farmer in early America. Thanks for joining us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Our purpose here is to live history, to understand it by doing it. Let's walk right into history. So most folks in the 18th century are going to have a kitchen, obviously, but most of, especially these poor farmers in the backcountry, they don't have a brick oven like you might find in the city. And of course, there isn't a local baker to just go and buy bread, which is what you would do if you lived in the city. And even later on in, say, the early 19th century, bake kettles get to be very popular. But in 1750, bake kettles really aren't around. So how are you going to bake your bread if you're a farmer out on the frontier? Well, you're going to use a large cast iron pot. That's what we'll be using to bake today. But first, let's make up our recipe. We got to get our dough ready so we have something to bake. So today's bread is a rye Indian bread, which is probably the most common staple bread in the 18th century for the colonies. It's the least expensive and easy to get a hold of. Bread in the 18th century, basic bread is so simple. It's just made with flour, salt, yeast, and water. So today for the flour, we've got what they would call Indian meal or Indian cornmeal, and you would maybe know it better as maize if you're in other parts of the world. This is a very simple ground up meal. And then we've got rye flour also. We're gonna mix these guys 50-50. These would be inexpensive and readily available. Other parts of the world, other flours would be used. Here, these are the ones that are simple. We've also got, of course, a little bit of salt, and that makes bread worth eating sometimes. If you don't have salt, you don't really have bread. We've also got something that is yeast. And this one, we're not using yeast. In the 18th century, nice breads, especially city breads, they would be using barm, which is yeast that they would get from the brewer. This kind of bread really needs something that's a lot closer to sourdough. And what I've got here is actually a dried up, a dried up piece of old dough. And this is what's called a leaven technique, or the old dough technique, where we would use dough from a previous batch. If we baked bread in the last couple of days or in the last week, our dough might be wet. We'd have this kind of old lumpy hunk of dough from the last batch that we didn't bake. This is several years old. This is actually a batch from Conner Prairie that we got a couple of years ago. We'll revive this yeast and use it today. So to get our yeast ready to use in this recipe, we have to soak these in nice warm water. You'll want a couple of chunks. We're going to soak this in warm water to get it activated. That way it's really easy to mix in. And the last ingredient, of course, is nice clean water. The best bread is made with the best water, so you want to have very, very nice clean water. Let's get mixing this up. You don't need to overwork this dough. Not a lot of kneading. We just need to get it into shape. And again, this is pretty moist. So as soon as we got a good shape on it, this one could even be just slightly moister. But we're going to set this aside right here in our vessel that will let this rise up. And we want something that kind of holds the heat in. We want to set this someplace warm. We're going to let this rise at least 4 hours, maybe 8 hours overnight, someplace warm. It won't get big. This isn't going to get really big. It will start to crack the surface. That's when we know that it's growing a little bit. Let's put this away someplace warm. So here is a classic cast iron pot of the 18th century, probably about a 5-gallon pot. And of course they would use something like this for cooking. They would also use it for different sorts of washing. So it's a very versatile pot. And not only can you use it for cooking, not only for washing, but we can use it for baking too. And there's a wonderful recipe or article in William Ellis's 1750 Housewife's Family Companion, and he talks about cottagers in sort of or lower class farmers in England, and he talks about them using their cast iron pots for baking. So first what we're going to do is heat up our hearth. We've got a hearth underneath this, some bricks, and we're going to heat that up nice and hot. And then We'll put our bread on that, turn our pot over the top of it, put a big fire over the top of it and bake it just like that. So I'm gonna get working on the fire while our dough is getting ready. Well, this one is ready to go. It's risen. You can see the cracks in it, how it's started to grow a little bit. And I've gone ahead and put a slice over the top to control some of that cracking. Let's set this aside for just a second. Now our fire pit should be ready and hot enough. Let me clear away these coals and get this hearth ready. This hearth is really nice and hot. This is going to be perfect. Let's get the bread on this. There's our pot on top. I've preheated this a little bit so it's not cold to start off with. And now we look at William Ellis's directions on this, and he says to cover it with wet straw or damp straw and then put some ashes on top of it and then add a little coals. What he's looking for is a slow heat for this, not a rapid giant bonfire. We don't want to burn this to a crisp, but we want to have a nice slow fire going on it. I don't have a lot of wet straw. I do have some cut sort of hay that's not good, and I've got sticks and leaves. So we're gonna build a small fire, a slow fire over the top of this and bake it for 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how long it takes and how hot it seems. The original recipe for a big loaf was 3 to 4 hours. This smells so good. This is right out of the oven, as it were, and I shouldn't cut into this. This should set up. We should let this set for a half hour, 20 minutes, an hour, who knows how long, for the crumb to set up so it won't be gooey. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna cut into it right now because I can't wait. I'm just gonna take a little slice off the side here. There we are. It's still steaming. It's steaming hot. Let me try it without butter. This is great. I cut into it way too early. Don't tell anybody. This is super. This is amazing. No oven, no nothing. Cooked just like the poor farmer would. I mean, if he was really hungry, he would have cut into it too. This is just like stepping into a cabin in 1750 and taking bread right off the table. It's amazing. I love living history, trying it out. It's amazing. If you'd like to see an episode where we do this bread in depth, check out this episode.